If ever a race can define a career, it was the 1986 WS Cox Plate.
And Bonecrusher races.
The words still bring a tingle to the spine, reviving memories of a racehorse who displayed grit, determination and courage every time he took to the track. A horse that loved to win and that the racing public took to their hearts. That he ever took to the track was a minor miracle. As a yearling, he tore the skin off his shoulder while being prepared for the select sales in Waikato. If he had crushed the bone, he would never have raced. He also had another injury to his hind leg, but buyer Peter Mitchell wasn't deterred. He was acting on the advice of a breeding theorist who had recommended buying the colts from Agapasa. The theory was there would be a convergence of the titans somewhere on the bloodline. Mitchell paid $3,250 for the yearling that was quickly gelded and was aptly named Bonecrusher. He was more commonly known as Red in the stables of trainer Frank Ritchie. He won a couple of races in his 2-year-old season, but it was the win in the Eclipse Stakes which convinced Ritchie this horse had real potential.
In front though, Bonecrusher switches to the outside, they're all over the place. On the inside, Bold Edition, Starboard just in front. Bonecrusher going hard after him, Starboard. Oh, Starboard, Bonecrusher, absolutely nothing.
Bonecrusher was entered for the Bayer Classic later in the year. The race that we now know marks the start of the racing juggernaut over the next few months. But few people know that another drama almost cost him his life before that race. Ritchie used to work Bonecrusher at Sandspit in East Tamaki when the tide was right. However, one day Bonecrusher got his hind leg stuck in a hole as the tide started to come in. Fortunately, Red didn't panic and they rescued him, but it gave the team a real fright. There was another concern for Bonecrusher before the New Zealand Derby. For the first time, but not the last, Ritchie had to stand guard over his champion because of fears for his safety. Fortunately, Bonecrusher repaid that favour.
Still in front, Flight Bizot now coming at him hard. Bonecrusher in front, Flight Bizot's closing. Bonecrusher running about, but he's still in front. Flight Bizot trying to pull him back. Bonecrusher in front, and he's won the Derby. Second is Flight Bizot. Next behind them, Random Chance third. Field Answer was next.
Gary Stewart was the regular jockey, and the Bonecrusher crew were on the ride of their lives. Australia was the next testing ground. He'd failed to impress on an earlier quick visit. Now the Australians were about to become converts as Bonecrusher claimed the Tancred Stakes.
Look at Bonecrusher. Bonecrusher down the outside is coming home right over the top of them. Rand and Raven, Bonecrusher won the Tancred. What a performance.
The following week, it was the AJC Derby. And once again, the Ritchie crew had to provide round-the-clock surveillance on their rising champion.
Further out, Bonecrusher taking an age to get going. Easter is going with him, and on the extreme outside, Handy Proverb. 150 out, Terroristus the leader. They're coming from all directions. It's Bonecrusher, Handy Proverb and Drawn. Bonecrusher put his head in front. He's got a great big heart. Bonecrusher, he'll win the Derby. Bonecrusher, too good. Look at the photo.
Bonecrusher was tired after the Tancred, and the team knew how much it took to win the Derby. So it was time to go home and freshen for another spring raid across the ditch, this time in Melbourne. The first race was the Underwood Stakes at Caulfield. The odds reflected the growing popularity in Victoria of the horse that was everyone's favourite. The Caulfield Stakes was added to the trophy cabinet 2 weeks later, and then the build-up started for the Cox Plate. The anticipation in Melbourne was electrifying. He was even named Sporting Ambassador for New Zealand. Bonecrusher seemed invincible, but there was one threat on the horizon. Another New Zealand horse, Our Waverley Star from the O'Sullivan stable. An epic contest was expected, and the participants delivered what will forever be known as the race of the century.
He races up to Our Waverley Star. 100 out. Bonecrusher, Our Waverley Star. Stride for stride. Nothing in it. Our Waverley Star the round. Bonecrusher the outside. And Bonecrusher races into equine immortality.
It's hard to imagine the euphoria from that wonderful win could come crashing down within a few weeks. Bonecrusher was at the peak of his powers. Nothing could beat him on the track, and he was a strong contender to become the first Australasian horse to win the Japan Cup. Yet the visit to Tokyo almost killed Bonecrusher. He'd been galloping brilliantly in the lead up to the race, but then came down with a respiratory infection and couldn't run. Ritchie took Bonecrusher home and revived him enough for a return to Melbourne in the autumn of 1987. The race was the Australian Cup, and his main opponent was At Talac, the Melbourne Cup winner from just a few months before. Bonecrusher produced one of his greatest gut-busting runs.
At Talac 2 lengths in front. Bonecrusher in second placing from Armour Redman. At Talac the leader. Bonecrusher trying hard. At Talac, Bonecrusher going to him. A great struggle to hit the lead. Either Bonecrusher or At Talac nearly a dead heat. Nearly a dead heat, maybe.
It was Bonecrusher's race, and it was probably the last time he ran at his peak. The infection in the race against Attilac flattened Red, and he wasn't fit enough to defend his Cox Plate crown.
Way through also with Golden King.
There were other significant races ahead. A final Group 1 in the Air New Zealand Stakes in February of 1988.
Dariana sounds like fun. Bonecrusher stretching out after them, and Horlicks right through on the inside. Sounds like fun. Bonecrusher, and Bonecrusher got there. Photos. Horlicks second. Sounds like fun. Dariana the next one.
And Bonecrusher made it back to Moonee Valley to become part of an historic New Zealand trifecta in the Cox Plate later that year, finishing third behind Poetic Prince and Horlicks. Bonecrusher raced on until retired at the end of '89. 44 starts, produced 18 wins, 9 of them in Group 1 races, many from seemingly impossible positions. His popularity with the public never wavered in retirement, as Bonecrusher was regularly called upon for parades and to lead out the field for classic races, often forgetting he was supposed to be retired. This was a champion who knew how to thrill race crowds and whose lasting memory will always be for his will to win.